You always have advantage in some sense if you read history. If you don't, you're doomed to repeat it, as Hegel said. So you need to look to us, not because we're a role model and wonderful, but you can see all the mistakes that have been made too. So it's good to learn from it. And you do have, when we started, there was no technology at our disposal, so you have this widespread technology. I'm worried about the car here, for example, and even that last question we talked about. So if I have something to worry about, you have this beautiful public space. I have no problems with it. It's wonderful. And the zestfulness for people living here, their playfulness, the artwork, but the car still is ruining too much.
How to build a sustainable community from the ground up, not by leaders, by citizens. We created that story, citizens. We decided to create our own story, and what happens is, once that story is out there, it wasn't real and I'll tell you more about this, but the story was not real 40 years ago. We made it up. We created the story. And over 40 years, it's become true. Because as you put a message out, when you brand, in advertising, you brand Portland, now what happens is, young creatives, as they're called, are moving to Portland, fourth highest migration of young, well-educated, entrepreneurial people. And so the myth is becoming a reality.
Yes, public spaces and targeting certain places is important, but it seems like the bigger question here is, are those connected? Or, what else do you have to do to really keep the livability up? And the thing to do is give people more and more experiences in car-free zones. It's not to do away with the car, but if people don't remember what the experience was anymore. Oh, it's quiet. I can actually talk this close when I'm in. So more of those events. You can use social media a lot to get people out. Even the smart mob kinds of things. Be creative, playful. That's what you got at your disposal that we didn't have. Sometimes people get so dead earnest. And they don't understand that change takes place at a fun and playful level too. And I know you guys can do that. I've seen it. And so you're creative. You can be creative in this change where they're going, all right, we got this problem, let's do A, B, and C. Even in that early stage, as I said about communication, where you brainstorm, and you just throw out the wildest ideas possible until you can hone it down to which ones are really going to work. But something like that, I trust you guys, all of you people, not just guys, that you can do that. Between the social media and your attitude towards life, the love of Guadalajara, it's all there. It's just throwing yourselves into it and not working too hard. Remember, it's a long distance run. I always remind myself, it's not a sprint here. It's a long distance run.
And what's interesting now is that, remember what I said, they were like a renegade, illegal group when they started on this. And now there's 280 of these intersection projects, and the government, City of Portland, pays for them. They learned. They learned that this was a great way to involve people, and it was a good strategy for slowing down traffic.
Looking at it from a social movement point of view, you see an organization gets formed around an issue like getting more bikes. And you're on the outside, probably. You're an NGO or a voluntary group. And then when you're successful, your agenda is incorporated, and maybe they put you on a committee to do a master plan, and now you're working with the government. And then what comes along later, it did in the United States, is a group called Critical Mass. Right. And they would look at the people like, you guys are old-fashioned, and they would stretch the limits. When you study social movement, you realize that the energy is lost when it gets to the organizational stage. Right. So civil rights had incredible energy and power at the beginning that began to get lost, because pretty soon you're fundraising and buying computers and you're maintaining your organization rather than putting energy into something else. But anyway, there's this multitude of roles. You play off of each other, you know.
We're not going to solve global climate change problems by government or corporate leadership. Sorry to tell you that. When I was in Thailand last year, I spent some time around Southeast Asia looking at Rockefeller Brothers funded projects. And one, Chiang Rai, had showed us their solution to drought conditions in Chiang Rai. And they were going to take the Mekong River and an old channel and build a dam so there'd be water so the farmers could get water through drought year. I was asked to evaluate it, and I said, no, a centralized solution will not work. If you have one earthquake, then your whole security is gone. What you need to do is build 10,000 ponds, 10,000 small ponds. That way, if 5 ponds go out, you still have water. We need to build, and the other element of that is people can repair. I could repair a small pond. I can't repair a dam. If a dam breaks, you know, I have to ask for help. So the idea of resilience is to develop civic and social networks and to build these different solutions that are not just centralized and too dependent on one thing. Most of our sustainability in Oregon, our state, as well as Portland, is based on our land use system, which is also 40 years old. And it was a part of that story. And when we develop sustainability policies, often we use the land use system because the land use system is the basis of our resources.
I have this, I call it my vicious circle, trying to understand social global problems that seem overwhelming, like environmental ones. And I keep going, okay, so we need to do better planning. No, we need to build green streets. We need to, and every time I do that, I go, it doesn't matter what we do. If we said, let's put bicycles out, you know what people would do? We'd eventually have too many bicycles.
Exactly.
Or if you say you buy new green products, and you can take your bag into the grocery store instead of plastic. Well, it's a great idea, but eventually if you don't cut into the greed cycle, you'll still have too many, those bags will probably wear out, and pretty soon you've got a landfill problem with those bags.
Right.
So no matter what we do, there's a circle to it.
Right.
The only exit is to cut through the red tape of it, or the facade, which is, that's what I say with the car. You go like, well, yes, there's these practicalities. Someone has to get somewhere to A to B, but the car is not just that. And we know all of that. It's freedom, it's power, you know, that's what you have to cut through to get to change. And people are duped by it, unfortunately. They don't see that they're being persuaded to not see, they're being persuaded to follow that as a spiritual dream. They don't think of it that way, though. I've also heard that you're at that point where we were with policy gridlock, too many groups in it. So it's what I call a self-learning organization. You maybe need to create, you have some of it in your organization yourselves. You're doing some of that. This is part of it. But, you know, how do you get communication across different boundaries and bring people together and understand it as a dialogue issue that if I'm only into environment, then I sometimes refer to some of those people as eco-Nazis. You know, they're just like, they're so focused on that they don't see that they're not paying attention. And it's how the environmental justice movement came out of the failure of the environmental movement to recognize how poor people were having, Audubon actually put a hazardous dump in the Bronx, which was the beginning, so it was like the environmental movement is very postmodern, as they call it. It's not a movement that appeals to poor people who are just trying to survive. So you have to build that bridge and understand the different dialogues. And for that, you constantly have to develop new organizational structures. Ones that may include government and not, and partnerships. That has to keep, somebody call it the repertories of contention. It's the repertory of different actions and organizations, and that has to be consciously followed. It's one by one. And when I was beginning to save a watershed, what I did on a Saturday, every weekend I said I was going to talk to 5 people. about why we need. And so I would walk this trail until I talked to 5 people, because I thought, well, 5 people times 300, or not 300 days, but 52 times, and if 20 of us are doing that, you know, it's that kind of incremental one-to-one.
Growth.
Right, and you just have to keep envisioning that it's spreading, you know, and you take that, and not, those aren't big actions sometimes. It's just a very individualized one or small group one, you know.
Everyone should know the place they live, and all of our actions should be based on that knowledge. Not on some approach that we think works everywhere. We need to understand better the places we live.
I mean, you have a heart of a beautiful city. You seem to have energy in this group. Is just a wonderful group of people, you know, mix of ages and just definitely passion, intelligence. You got all the stuff, right?